Gather around the campfire, kids, or get in your tent because we're wrapping up camp. Welcome back. We have officially finished the second camp session for the summer and the last one. And these books were a better choice than the first session overall. God of the Woods is probably still my favorite of all of the ones that I've read, but this camp session went a lot better. Again, this is not going to have a whole lot of big spoilers throughout the video because half the fun of thrillers and mysteries and even horror books in general is not knowing what's going to happen. So if someone is like, hey, Camp Damascus has been on my TBR for a long time, and then they come into the video and they get spoiled, that's no fun. So maybe some light spoilers here and there, but we're going to hold back from really revealing the main big mysteries and things that happen in the books. I've got a friend. Bo is here to help. He's really tired though. Sorry. But he's going to help me go over the books today by laying down beside me and probably taking a nap, which is the most important thing that he could do. So the first book that I read was Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle, and this was a great first book by this author for me. I don't know anything about their other works, but I am willing to continue to read more Chuck Tingle because I know Bury Your Gaze has been on my TBR for over a year now, and possibly another one that I can't think of the name of at the moment. This was so good in so many ways, even though there was so much batshit crazy things happening and not great things happening, but which you might be like, those are batshit crazy and bad things. That's the same thing. Bad in the sense of religious trauma. That's its whole other situation going on. Forgot how uncomfortable sitting on the ground is. Camp Damascus follows Rose, who is our main character, and Rose lives in this kind of a tiny town, but it does have a lot of people in it. But all of these people are all part of the same church. Rose and her family are part of this really intense, I'm trying to think of the correct word I want to use, like obsessive church. But then as the book went on, I was like, oh, okay, this is no longer a church. This is a cult, which, I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but everybody in this town is a part of this church. Every single person. And at first, when I started reading, I was like, okay, Rose is probably like maybe a younger high schooler, like maybe 14, 15 years old. And then they mentioned like going off to university, and I was like, oh, okay. So probably like 17, 18. Didn't get that because she reads very young, very naive. And then they mentioned that she's 20 years old. And I was really confused. So here's a few light spoilers. This church has like missions that the kids of the church have to do. They do one, I believe, when they're 15 and then another one when they're 18. And each of the missions last 1 year. So they end up graduating when they're about 20 years old, which is about 2 years older than the typical US high school graduate. So she definitely reads very young, very naive, which obviously was the intent of the author. And with how the church, the cult, and everyone keeps these kids, keeps everyone in the cult so naive to what's actually happening in the real world, because you're only supposed to focus on the cult. Sorry, church. The church is your life. You don't need to worry about anything else. So her being this naive, her reading this young, totally made sense. But at the very beginning, it threw me off so much because I was like, no way that you're 20 years old and this is how you are. There's no way, but it makes more sense as you read through the book. And it was just so good. And it was just such good character. Well, she did have character development, but a really great way to highlight a character who has been stuck in this particular society for her entire life. There's Bo. He was on the other side, but he decided this was a better angle for him. No napping yet. He's too into the books that we're going to be discussing. So this book obviously has a lot of religious themes in it, a lot of religious trauma. So if you are sensitive to that, maybe maybe read more of an in-depth summary before picking it up. However, the whole book in this town, there is a camp called Camp Damascus. And it's not really a summer camp because I think it's open like year round, but it's a conversion camp. It's the only conversion camp in, I believe, the US that has the highest success rate of 100%. And for a good reason, because this is also a horror book as well. And I really appreciated the way that they included the horror with the camp and with the entire book. We start out with Rose kind of having visions of sort, like she's seen something that no one else has seen. And people are kind of going, all right, you doing okay there? Because you're acting a little goofy. Then certain physical symptoms are happening to her. Those physical symptoms are only really affecting her when she's having impure thoughts about another girl. So she's kind of starting to do some digging. They send her off to the whole church therapist, but that doesn't really go that well. She's starting to do some digging. And then her mom ends up meeting her while she's coming home from, I believe, the therapist, and essentially kind of kicks her out, but it's to save her own life. Rose ends up meeting up with another exile from the church, actually two of them. And then they're the ones that are like, we're starting to remember what happened because there's gaps in their knowledge, there's gaps in their memories. And they go, I don't ever remember going to Camp Damascus, but there's a lot of trails and clues that indicate they have been, and that pretty much a lot of kids in their town, a lot of people in their town have been to Camp Damascus. So they're trying to figure out what Camp Damascus really is, because there's some unsavory things going on. They already know that. They're trying to learn to accept themselves because they are part of the LGBTQIA plus community. The church obviously does not accept it. So they're trying to learn how to accept themselves. They know something unsavory is going on with the camp, with the town, with the cult. So they're trying to figure it out. And then they're like, we need to free these kids, because there's always kids at Camp Damascus. Camp is like always full. And they go, we need to get these kids out of there. We need to save them. And as it turns out, Rose is not the only one who is having these visions. Other people are having them. And we get the final big showdown at Camp Damascus. And everything is just building up to this. You can feel the tension building. You can feel the urgency between the characters and what's going on, just building throughout the whole book. The ending was so satisfying. I ended up giving Camp Damascus a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed the characters that we got to meet. Rose was so frustrating to me at the beginning of the book until it kind of started to sink in, and I realized this isn't necessarily her fault. It's, again, a product. It's kind of like Alice in The God of the Woods. She's a product of her environment, and she literally does not know any better. That's not her fault. And she does have character development and character growth throughout the book. So as frustrated as I was with her at the beginning, I was still a little bit frustrated, I think, at the end of the book. But overall, great start to session 2, and great start for my first Chuck Tingle book. The next book was The Honeys by Ryan LaSala, and this was so good. I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 as well. This one is also a book that I could see myself rereading, and I also would like to read more from this author. We have a non-binary main character for this book, and I just realized that Camp Damascus and having a non-binary main character in this one, that's pretty good, because considering we read these for June is Pride Month, happy Pride, that was just kind of a nice little extra. So our main character for the Honeys is Mars, and we start out at home where Mars is almost murdered by their twin sister Caroline. Not the best start to the summer. Also, I misspoke a second ago. Mars is gender fluid, not non-binary, and I just wanted to make that correction. So we have a gender fluid main character for the Honeys. So as I stated before, we open the book with Mars almost getting murdered by their twin sister Caroline, and Caroline does end up dying. They end up both kind of falling through the balcony off the second floor to the first floor. And so we open up with an almost murder and then Caroline's funeral at the home. Their parents, I forget what the dad does. he's some bigwig, but the mom is also some political bigwig. So there's a lot of pressure on Mars to conform to gender norms and put on a good face for the public, even though their twin sister just tried to murder them and then died. But yeah, let's make sure everyone sees that we're the appropriate amount of sad. We learned that Caroline and Mars actually went for, I think, 1 year. Caroline has been going to this camp for years and years and years, and even goes to like a kind of a winter camp. Mars has noticed in this past year leading up to the current summer when Caroline was going to camp that Caroline just seemed really anxious, wasn't really wanting to go. It seemed like she was putting on a show that she wanted to go to camp, but the action said otherwise. So Mars is noticing something's off with Caroline. The vibe is off. They don't know why. And there's kind of a rift between the two. And so Mars isn't really talking to Caroline. Caroline seems to be hiding something from Mars. Then the whole murder and funeral happened. So now Mars really can't talk to Caroline. And there's a mystery because Caroline was supposed to be at camp when she came home. So why was she at home? And camp is far. Camp is like up in the mountains, hours of a car drive away. So no one went to go get her. She had to have gotten here on her own. Something's up with Caroline, and Mars is like, I need to find out what was going on with my sister. Mars had a very bad time at camp. We don't know exactly what happened while they were there, but they were also forced to conform to gender norms at camp because they do the typical like boys cabins and girls cabins. At the end of the summer, there's kind of a boys versus girls showdown. And so Mars, who is gender fluid, is like, I don't feel as though I fit in with either group, and the camp wasn't willing to budge. We don't find out until close to the end of the book what really happened, and Mars made the decision after that, I am not going back to camp. The parents didn't push it, mostly because the parents want to save face, but Caroline's the only one that's been going back. And in order to find out what happened to Caroline, Mars is going, I'm just going to have to go back. This is the last thing on earth I want to do, but I'm going to have to go back to camp and I'm going to have to find out what happened to Caroline. When Mars gets to camp, they are assigned to a boys' cabin, but Mars ends up making friends with Caroline's old friends in the cabin that she was assigned to, which is nicknamed the Honeys. The Honeys' cabin is cabin H, and it is set far back from the rest of the camp. It's some weird thing when the camp was set up. It was kind of created for lower class kids, and essentially these rich kids were just like, oh yeah, they can come to camp, but they're going to go way over there away from the rest of us. So the Honeys are an enigma for the rest of the camp. They're cool, popular girls that you want them to notice you and you want to be a part of the group, but at the same time, something feels a little bit off. But they accept Mars into the group, and Mars is trying to infiltrate the group anyway because they're thinking, this was the cabin my sister has been in for so many years, and they just feel that the Honeys have something to do with Caroline's death. And from then on, it's just this weird kind of acid trip daydream, but in a really good way. Honestly, at the very end, I was not kicking myself, but going, I should have seen this coming. Not the exact ending in particular, but the overall idea of the ending. And I didn't see it coming. I kind of got one piece of the puzzle. I was like, oh, so-and-so is probably involved in this. And they were, but it was so much bigger than I expected. I think I read this book in about a day, and I was hooked from the start. There's a lot of sirens going off, so I'm hoping you can't hear it. But if you can, sorry. But this book had kind of a sad ending in a way. It was sad, but also it was so trippy. This book was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I really thought, just by reading the summary, I was like, okay, we've got a camp murder on our hands, and the sibling is going to go try to find out what happened. The Honey's probably involved. It's going to be this really messy camp murder cover-up situation because there are more rich kids involved. It went so far beyond where I thought it was going to go. Why did I rate this a 4? I might bump it up to a 4.5, but this one was such a good book. I have debated on getting a physical copy of this for myself because this one's from my library, and I would like to read it again just to experience mostly the ending all over again. This book was really trippy in a really fun way. Highly recommend. So 2 out of 2. We're doing really good for Camp Session 2. Camp Famous is by Jennifer, I believe it's Blecher. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And this was a middle grade, and it was fine. I ended up rating this a 3 out of 5. I personally probably would have rated it a little bit lower. However, I realize I am not the target audience for this book. In fact, I am way above the target audience range. So I didn't think it was fair to rate it lower than a 3 because it was fine. It didn't do anything spectacular, but it also wasn't the worst thing I read. We already know what book that was for summer. But this read a lot younger than I was anticipating. Probably the main age range, I think, is like a 9 to 10-year-old. I believe all of the characters in this book, all of the kids anyway, are about 10 to 11 years old. I was expecting them to be maybe a little bit older, maybe on the 13 to 14, possibly even 15-year-old age range. It says it's a mix of The Princess Diaries meets Harriet the Spy, and that's not what I would say, but based off of that alone, I was like, okay, they're gonna be younger. Obviously, it's middle grade, but maybe like an older middle school or a younger high school even. But this was quite a bit younger than I was expecting, so I think that's why it was my least favorite out of the 4 that I read for this particular camp session. It was fine, didn't do anything spectacular, but this young girl, I've already forgotten her name, please hold. I clearly don't remember a whole lot about this book. It was a very fast read, very easy read. I read it in less than a day. And when I say a fast read, it's a very fast read. I mean, we start out with our main character at school. I'm fully prepared, can you tell? Abby. So our main character is Abby, and just a regular kid. I think they're in like 5th grade. So not even technically in middle school, but just your basic average kid, kind of a little, not an outcast necessarily, but they're definitely not in the popular crowd at school. And it's pretty evident just from how the kids treat her at school. They don't shun her, but they're not trying to fall all over themselves to be her best friend. I forget exactly what happens. Something with like a jump roping incident or doing a cartwheel, and the kids on the playground make fun of Abby a little bit. She gets really upset, cries to her favorite teacher, and the teacher ends up talking to Abby's parents and getting her into Camp Famous. Now, Abby's been wanting to go to an overnight sleepaway camp for years, has always begged her parents, one in particular that she's really been obsessed with. And the parents are like, no, we're not going to do that. It costs a lot of money. You don't need to go there. I forget their reasonings, but they're not going to send her to camp. So when the teacher talks to the parents and says, hey, I think she should go to this particular summer camp because the teacher's brother is in charge of it, the parents end up letting her go. But they tell her a fake name for the summer camp. The camp is literally called Camp Famous, but they make up a different name and say like, oh, it's camp such and such. They don't prep her at all because this camp has a princess, pop stars, secret genius kids, another kid from her class who writes under a different name for like the New York Times and Huffington Post and writes really, I guess, informative and thoughtful articles about life as a kid. I didn't really understand that one, but this very well-known writer, but they've just flipped their first and last name. No one's going to figure that out. But the parents didn't prep Abby at all for this camp. So when Abby gets to the camp, after flying on a private plane with the princess and pop star and everybody else, and the kid from school fills Abby in on what's actually going down, she's like, oh my God. Which I too was like, why would you lie? She's gonna have a more difficult time now because her reaction to all this is, I should make up a fake identity. They can't know I'm just a normal person. I'll be kicked out and none of these famous kids will want to talk to me. So I'm gonna be a famous writer. But I'm not gonna tell anybody what kind of books that I write. Which, to be fair, a lot of these famous kids, it's 3 weeks. No one can get into this camp. It is locked down tight. And they just get to be kids for 3 weeks. And they respect Abby when they're like, oh, what do you do? Like, what are you known for? And she goes, oh, I'm an author. And they go, oh, cool. Is it anything that we've read before? And they're like, but you don't have to tell us. So they do respect and understand that, you know, just because you're famous, you may want that little bit of anonymity and not have to perform for the world. So it's nice to see the author kind of show that. I don't know, man. The parents couldn't have told her anything. That was a little bit wild and a choice. Abby's at camp. Camp is only about 3 weeks and nothing really major is happening. They do address a couple of things about kids feeling not as great as their siblings, like the princess that's there. The cat's messing with the tent. Sir. Such as the princess who's there, she has an older brother and always feels second best. She never feels as good or as talented as her brother. And then there's one kid, the only reason this kid is famous is because she unfortunately is like the YouTube families that we've seen. Her mom, from a very young age, just started filming this kid, you know, doing silly kid things, uploading it to the internet. And now the kid feels like she has to be on and perform all the time, because we do get a scene where that kid is like sitting on a bench by herself, just kind of hanging out by the lake. Abby comes up and wants to talk to her and says, hey, and the kid jumps like she's nervous. She doesn't like people behind her. She doesn't like people sneaking up behind her, probably because her mom does that to her all the damn time. There were some things in there that the author is trying to bring up discussion about that I did enjoy. The only part that I would say is like very Harriet the Spy is we're at week 3, the last week of camp. The kids are days from going home and they're going to put on this big show at the end of the camp. There's a little bit of contention between the princess and Abby about whose idea they're going to do for the show. And that's kind of where the Harriet the Spy part comes in, because they find the journal that Abby's been writing in, and Abby's just writing her thoughts. She's literally just journaling her thoughts. And they only read 1 page, which doesn't feel accurate to me with what kids would do, but anyway. So they kind of attack her like Harriet was attacked, even though Harriet was writing about everybody. And they're like, are you writing about us? Are you about to go and call all these news stations and like make a bunch of money? You've just been lying to us the whole time. So Abby ends up leaving camp early. It's a whole thing. But by the end of it, of course, they've all made up. They're all besties by the end of the day. Very quick, very short. You know, everyone's happy by the end of the book. And it was fine. I think I gave a little more spoilers in that one, but I don't imagine a lot of you watching this are probably going to pick up this book and read it, so I don't feel as bad giving as many spoilers, but it was kind of hard not to because the book was so quick. It's under 300 pages, happens just, we kind of dive right into it, and it was fine. A little younger than what I was expecting, but because I'm not the target audience, I just think it's pretty middle of the road. I rated it a 3. And that was my least favorite of all of them, but it wasn't terrible. And it was a nice little break between all the thrillers that I've been reading. Kind of a little brain bleach, if you will, just a little reset almost. But that was the 3rd book, and we're on to the next one. The last book for camp session number 2 is The Lake House by Sarah Beth Durst. Hopefully that's not reflecting. We don't have to do any reflecting on this book. We just have to do a lot of running from a demon. This one, I also ended up giving 4 stars, and I was flipping through the rest of this author's bibliography, and they have written so many books. This is an author I would like to read more from. I had a really good time with this book. I went into it just expecting to take my time, but I ended up reading it in just a day. I was even interrupted by a tornado siren, and I still finished this book in a day. If I do this next summer, I'm gonna bring in a bunch of pillows and a mattress to sit on. However, that's not what we're here to discuss. So this book was the most fast-paced thing I have read, I think, so far this year. We go right into it. The book follows Claire, Reva, and Mariana. And so they get dropped off at this camp across a lake. They take a boat, they get dropped off, and the kid who drops them off is like, all right, see you in August, which is, I think, like a month away or so. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Are you not going to take us up to the camp? And he's like, no, dude, just follow that path. Okay, bye. And they're left to their own devices. They follow this path for about like a half mile or so, and they get to what is called a retreat of sorts. It's not necessarily a summer camp, but they get to the lake house, and it's completely burned down. The three girls have no idea what's going on. They race back down to the dock. They're going to try to flag down the kid who just drove away in the boat. Can't catch him in time. So now they're just stuck with no adults, no cabins, no nothing, because their cell phones also don't work out here. You know, we're in the woods. Like, we are in the woods. There is no cell reception. And these girls are not really the outdoorsy camper type of girls. No shade. They even admit that themselves. They make camp like at the dock because they go, okay, well, maybe somebody will come by. So we'll stay here. We'll make a fire. Hopefully somebody comes by in a boat and saves us, because the parents aren't expecting to hear back from the kids at least that first week. And they don't know how long they're going to be stuck there. And then they also find a dead body. So that just ups the urgency of them wanting to get the absolute hell off of this island. The whole book is a wild ride from the beginning when they get dropped off until the very end. They end up finding this weird trap door under one of the burned out cabins, and they go down and they find a cage, like a person-sized cage, and it's kind of like a bunker, but without all the rations and everything, because there's chains against the wall in the cage, a really scary cave, like going past it, and they're like, I'm not going down there. So they climb back up, spend the night. There's a dude with a gun that randomly shows up, and also a wild man. That's what we call him. And then the kid ends up coming back, so he gets sucked into all of this wild adventure that they're on. They're getting chased through the woods. They're trying to run from a man with a gun and the wild man. At one point, we do get the kids turning on each other. Whether it's all of them or just a couple of them, you'll have to read to find out. And it's also kind of trippy, and not quite in the same way as the Honeys, but it's a little bit of a trip on its own. So we have the horror aspect of being stuck and isolated somewhere with absolutely no means of communicating to try to get out of the situation. And they're having to depend on survival aspects to just make it to the next day. But you also have this horror aspect in it of being chased by someone and something that you don't know. And all you know is it wants to hurt you. And the person also wants to hurt you. This probably sounds a little chaotic, but it was a little chaotic in a really fun way, because I don't want to say too much for even minor spoilers. It gave a supernatural horror aspect that I wasn't expecting. So that was a fun turn. The summary states that the girls know that something is hunting them. So I don't feel like that's a huge spoiler for me to say it. But even going into this book, I'm not sure what I was expecting. I guess I wasn't expecting the reality horror with the survival aspects and the real people that are involved, but also getting supernatural horror at the same time. I really enjoyed this book. I had a hard time putting it down, and it's a pretty fast read. It's very fast paced. You can get through it pretty quickly. There's a lot that goes on. It was a wild ride, and I would be interested in reading more from this author. Very good way to end camp, honestly. And that wraps up summer camp. 2 months with I almost said 4. Technically it was 4 books for each, but 8 different books over 2 months. I would say the second camp session went a little bit better than the first, but I still had a lot of like very highly rated books. And I think I would like to do this again next year. Again, maybe I do a little more research, and I am absolutely open to recommendations. If you have any books that are summer camp themed, whether or not it's kids at a summer camp or like exploring a summer camp, I don't know, history with a summer camp, let me know. Leave them down below. But thank you for joining me for camp. I hope you guys enjoyed hanging out in the tent with me. If you read any of the books that I mentioned in either video, please let me know your thoughts down below, and let me know if you disagreed with anything that I said. Because again, some of the books were very mixed ratings, but overall, especially the second set, had a lot of a more positive and higher rating than some of the first ones. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me for summer camp. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Leave me comments below with any more book recommendations because I love adding to my TBR. And summer camp doesn't have to be just a summer thing, honestly. I could read those all year round, especially like horror themed summer camp. Those are always a good time. That's fine for any time of the year. But thanks for hanging out, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. Now I have to take the tent down. The cats have enjoyed the tent a whole lot. They've enjoyed napping in the tent and playing with the tent. But the tent does take up most of the living room, so the tent's gotta go. Maybe I'll use it for actual camping next.